Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
This week, more than 1,500 business leaders, lawmakers, lobbyists, philanthropists are on Mackinac Island, all here for the Detroit Regional Chamber's annual policy conference.
It's where decision makers, influencers, people who want to be decision makers and or influencers converge once a year, to go about that business.
And with a dozen candidates running for statewide office on the island, you can't separate the politics from the policy at Mackinac.
And to begin the conference, new polling was just dropped, commissioned by the chamber, looking at the state of the 2026 race and, motivation among Michiganders to actually vote.
So today, digging into what we have learned. Richard Schuba conducted the poll. He is founder of Glenn Gariff Group. Richard, hi.
Hey, it's great to be here with you.
So let's start first with just how motivated voters are feeling right now, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the candidate polling. What do we know about how voters, Republican, Democratic, and independents in Michigan are feeling about the motivation to vote right now?
Well, we watch this every year, and I think the story moving into 26 is who doesn't vote? This has become really central to how we look at elections now, and what we're seeing is some really interesting differences in motivation. We do that 1 to 10 scale. How motivated are you to vote in next November's election? Democrats, they're at a 9.2. Republicans at an 8.8. And independents, typically lower, are at 8.3. But we need to put that into some context. For example, where was everybody in May of last year going presidential? And Democrats were at 9. They're now at 9.2, already 18 months out. So last year, going into the presidential, Republicans were at a 9.6. They've dropped to 8.8. Other way we look at this is people tell us, are you definitely planning to vote or probably planning to vote? 75% of Democrats are saying they're definitely going to vote compared to only 66% of Republicans. That's an 8-point advantage in definite vote for Democrats. And the reason I bring this up is we saw this play out in polling we did over in Wisconsin during the Supreme Court race. When you look at kind of registered voters, the race looked very close. But we saw a clear advantage to the liberal running for Supreme Court, the progressive, compared to the conservative. It was at least a 10-point difference in definite vote. We're seeing a similar pattern right now shaping up in Michigan. It's what we'll keep our eyes on.
Democrats are more motivated, but that's not super unusual, right? That the party not in power tends to have more motivated voters?
You saw that certainly in midterm elections. The party in power typically takes a shellacking in a midterm election. The only 2 exceptions this century to that were 2002 after 9/11 and, of course, 2022 because of overturning Roe v. Wade.
Right.
So the expectation here should be that Republicans are going to face a tough environment nationally because it's a midterm and it's a referendum on the presidency.
Picking up on that, you tested a generic ballot, Republican versus Democrat, no names. What did you find?
The generic ballot, typically you see the Republicans go for the Republican, Democrats for the Democrat, and you keep your eyes on those independents, although at this stage, most independents have no clue where they're going to go. So what we see amongst registered voters, the big, broad registered voters, we see Republicans with just a fractional advantage on Democrats, 0.8%. But when you look at definite voters, that moves to a 2.2% advantage for Democrats. And so that's why it's really important that we look at the difference between registered voters and definite voters, because we saw it, for example, in 2020, in 2024, registered voters were a better predictor of the outcome versus definite voters. In off-year elections, definite voters tend to be a better predictor. So we're going to keep our eyes on those differences because they really do matter.
That's fascinating.
It really is.
And it appears right now, at least, that there's also a difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to planning on voting. What did we learn about the differences here?
Well, that's that definite vote.
Yeah.
Are you definitely voting or are you probably voting? And this is what Donald Trump does so well. He takes those voters that say they're probably voting and gets them to vote. But without Donald Trump on the ballot, and we have two examples now in 2018 and 2022, without Donald Trump on the ballot, those probable voters really are just probable voters.
We're speaking with Richard Schuba, founder of Glenn Gariff Group, about new polling out just this week during the Mackinac Policy Conference about voter enthusiasm, but also about Michigan candidates running for statewide open seats. So, Richard, let's turn to those candidates themselves. Let's start with the race for governor. What's going on here?
So let me preface all this conversation with this poll is very early in the race.
Yes.
We don't even know the full field yet. So in terms of name ID, let's look at the Democratic side, for example. Jocelyn Benson leads by a long shot. She's amongst definite voters, got 73% name ID. You look at the other Democrats, Garland Gilchrist, the lieutenant governor, is at 48%. And Chris Swanson, the Genesee sheriff, is at 29% name ID. So she has a huge advantage in name identification. On the Republican side, you've got John James at nearly 70% name ID, but Tudor Dixon is at 74%.
Someone who has not even announced that they are running yet.
And we should point out, she was the Republican candidate for governor in the last gubernatorial race.
Who lost to Gretchen Whitmer.
By a lot.
She has very high name ID. Now, I will point out, she is the kind of the one candidate whose name ID is underwater. What we mean by that is her favorable is at 23%, her unfavorable is at 27%. So that means more people view her unfavorably. A lot of people remember her, but John James is close at 70% name ID. It's breaking 30 to 22, and he's got the benefit of several statewide runs also. But then you have, for example, Mike Cox, former attorney general. I was surprised he's actually got 57% name ID, but he's still underwater too, at 9 to 15. People recognize the name, they don't have a lot of association with it. There's Senator Eric Nesbitt, who comes in with only 24% name ID, which is frankly typical of what we see when a state rep, a state senator gets into these statewide races. They generally start with minimal name ID. I like to joke that state reps and state senators always overestimate their name ID and their importance to voters. And of course, then there's an additional candidate, and that is Mike Duggan.
We've been talking about Republicans. We've been talking about Democrats. Mike Duggan is an independent. He's a former Democrat, but he announced last year that he's running for governor as an independent. What did we find here that's so remarkable?
Honestly, I think in my 42, 43 years of polling in Michigan, Mike Duggan has the most fascinating numbers I've ever seen. He has 60% name ID. It is breaking 32 to 7, which is good in its own right. But when you look at it by region, in the Metro Detroit market, he has 86% name ID. Those are similar to Gretchen Whitmer's numbers. They are rock star numbers. But the reverse of that is in outstate. He's only got 31% name ID, breaking 7 to 3. 68% of voters in outstate have never heard of Mike Duggan. So we are looking at a tale of two worlds. But what really got my attention about Mike Duggan's numbers, he is the first candidate I have ever seen running for office who has a favorable name ID by every party affiliation, meaning Democrats, independents, and Republicans all view him favorably. Granted, those are all voters down in Metro Detroit who have known him for years. But I haven't seen a candidate that really runs across partisan affiliations with favorable name ID. And that's really unique.
Favorable name ID pulling support from both Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, let's dive into those numbers.
Please.
This is where it gets really interesting. So I'm going to cite the difference between registered and definite voters here, because there are differences in the race. We tested all the different combinations, but the most intriguing is the one with the front runners. Jocelyn Benson versus John James versus Mike Duggan. Amongst registered voters, Benson holds a very tiny lead, 34.5 to John James at 34, with Mike Duggan at 21.5%. But amongst definite voters, we see Benson jump to 38-33, a 5-point lead on John James, with Duggan still at 21.5%. Again, when you look at those definite voters, there is a clear advantage to the Democrats right now. So the Republicans are going to be forced to really turn out those probable voters. But when you look at this by region, what's really interesting here, Mike Duggan leads in Metro Detroit. In every matchup we did, Mike Duggan holds a lead, takes 35 to 40% of the vote in Metro Detroit. Problem is, he gets clobbered in outstate Michigan. He takes only 9 to 12% of the vote. So the challenge for Mike Duggan, there is a path here for him. It is a difficult path. And that is, can he even just get 20% of the vote in outstate Michigan? If he does, this becomes a dead even three-way race. And frankly, him making inroads in outstate very much hurts John James, because John James has to do well in outstate Michigan to win this race, because he's trailing right now to Jocelyn Benson. But the question is, can Mike Duggan do that? And the second question I have, looking further down the road, as this election becomes a referendum on Donald Trump, as mid-years do voters who are 18 months out flirting with an independent, do they go back to their corners?
Right.
Meaning their pattern of Republican and Democrat. That's a huge challenge for Mike Duggan. But boy, these numbers are awfully intriguing right now.
Well, and I think that's going to my next question, which is how much do you think about this sort of favorability among both Democrats and Republicans for Duggan and polling support from both Democrats and Republicans? How much of this is about candidate Mike Duggan himself versus this sense that perhaps voters are feeling a bit like a plague on both their houses and they just simply like the idea of an independent for governor?
Well, I'll tell you, we've been hearing a lot about this question of who does Mike Duggan hurt? Does he hurt Jocelyn Benson, become the spoiler because he used to be a Democrat? Well, the numbers don't bear that out. He hurts both Republican and Democrat nominees equally. But we have all talked about this. I think I talk about it ad nauseum. Michigan is decided by independent voters. That 20% that are true, clear independents. And Mike Duggan just dominates amongst those independent voters. The challenge is, does he have the resources it's going to take to compete against not just Jocelyn Benson's campaign and John James' campaign, but the Republican Governors Association and the Democratic Governors Association, which are going to come into Michigan with huge dollars. Like I said, there is a path here for Mike Duggan to do this, which would be wildly unique for Michigan to have an independent, such a prominent candidate for governor. But it's not an easy path. And it's going to require him to continue to pull equally from both parties, but particularly boost his name ID, boost his vote in outstate Michigan. And the minute he steps out there, I would expect Republicans to just come at him full throttle, because Republicans cannot afford to lose those votes in outstate Michigan.
Richard, let's quickly turn to the other top of the ballot seat, an open U.S. Senate race with the retirement of Senator Gary Peters. We have a number of Democrats who've announced, only one Republican so far. What did you find?
Well, this race looks far more traditional to Michigan, simply because we don't have this kind of behemoth of an independent candidate sitting in the race. It's a two-party race here. So just in terms of name ID, the big name in this race is on the Republican side. It is the sole candidate that's announced, and it is Mike Rogers. And amongst definite voters, he's at 77% name ID. He does not have a lot of room to grow because people remember him from his last campaign against Lissa Slotkin, and it's reflected as his favorable, unfavorable, which is 24 to 25. So 1 point underwater. The other potential Republican is Bill Huizenga, congressman from West Michigan, at 35% name ID. He's got a lot of room to grow, but boy, he's got a lot of work to do compared to Mike Rogers. Then you have 3 Democratic candidates. None of them have huge name ID, but leading the field is Congresswoman Haley Stevens out of Oakland County, 44% name ID, breaking 16-8. Abdul El Sayed comes in with 36% name ID, breaking 9-9, even. And then the third candidate is State Senator Mallory McMorrow, coming in at 21% name ID, breaking 8-2. So just in terms of name ID on the Dem side, you see Haley Stevens with a bit of an advantage, but all of these candidates have a lot of room to grow. I would say Mallory McMorrow has a lot of work to do, but the race becomes really interesting against Mike Rogers, who is the clear frontrunner for the nomination. Mike Rogers, amongst definite voters, he leads Abdul El Sayed by 2 points. Mallory McMorrow leads amongst definite voters by 1 point, but Haley Stevens, she leads Mike Rogers amongst definite voters by 6 points. And the difference in these races is, once again, those independent voters.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where it gets really fascinating. Haley Stevens has some sort of independent magic, which is really intriguing because she's running dead even with independents with Mike Rogers. And think about that. He's got 77% name ID to her 43%. And she's running even with independents. Compare that to, Mallory McMorrow, who is losing those independents to Mike Rogers by double digits. And then you look at Abdul El Sayed, and he's losing the independents to Mike Rogers by more than 20 points. He has a very clear problem with independents. And I think he's going to give Haley Stevens a heck of a run for the nomination. But I do think one of the questions Democrats are going to have to ask is, what is this problem Abdul El Sayed has with independents and how is he going to overcome it compared to Haley Stevens, who already has overcome it?
Okay, so as we let you go, the candidates are here on Mackinac Island, plus their campaign managers and donors, supporters, all pouring through this new polling. After the hours and hours that you have spent with this data, what should we all take away from it?
Yeah, the takeaway from me is the takeaway it always is, which is who actually bothers to show up? Who's going to vote? And we see this constant teeter-totter between Republicans and Democrats compared to, when Donald Trump's on the ballot, Republicans turn out. When he's not on the ballot, Democrats take a lead. In the governor's race, we got Mike Duggan this time. And he's sitting right smack dab in the middle of that teeter-totter. And does he benefit from that? And frankly, neither side of the aisle, none of the voters, including the independents, are happy with the direction of anything. Republicans think Donald Trump's making everything great. Democrats and independents do not. That becomes very problematic for Republicans, I think, moving forward.
That is Richard Schuba, founder of the Glenn Gariff Group, filling us in on the latest political survey commissioned by the Detroit Regional Chamber for the annual Mackinac Policy Conference. Richard, as always, thank you so much for your data and your time.
Thanks,
Always
Richard.
good to be with you guys.
And that is It's Just Politics for this Mackinac Policy Week. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.